Titus chapter 1. And I'm going to start reading verse 9. And we'll read through verse 16. And honestly, we probably won't get through any of this today, but we'll see what happens. All right, Titus chapter 1, starting off at verse 9. Says, holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince the gainsayers. For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretians are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. Unto the pure all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure. But even their mind and conscience is defiled. They profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate. Father, we thank you for the opportunity we have to study the Word. As we take a look at these verses and we go through the book of Titus here, may it open up our hearts and our minds to realize the time in which we live, that we can take this information and understand what Titus is doing here in Crete, that we might be able to apply it today where we are in the dispensation of the grace of God, to the furtherance of the gospel and to the praise and honor and glory of your Son, Jesus Christ. It's in his name we pray. Amen. So, there's a few things as we go through this passage that obviously we're going to get a little bit more in depth. It was kind of weird. I was asking what part this is to Titus, and it's kind of weird. You think Titus? There's 3 chapters, right? We've talked about 3. There's 3 chapters in the book of Titus, and it would take, what did I say, about 10, 12 minutes to read, something like that. I think so. I said 15 if you're slow, kind of like me. And it's odd to think that this is the 13th part just of chapter 1. We did 2 introduction things of here's what Titus is, here's who Titus was, here's what Paul used him for, and then he's applying what he's learned from Paul here as he goes and sets up churches in Crete. Now, there's a few things that I want to point out real quick, and there's some information. I told Delilah, and she's been worried all morning, I think. I told her I didn't go to sleep till about 3:30 last night because I couldn't stop thinking about what we're going to do today. There's just some things on my heart and on my mind to where we're going, especially moving forward. And I was thinking, today would be one of those days that just kind of you look back and you're like, that day was special. Because I think today could be a turning point in where we're going. Because of some things what we're going to talk about today. But I want you to notice some things here real quick. What's the purpose that Titus is left in Crete to do? What is it that he's left to do? Well, to set things in order, right? The things that are wanting, the things that are lacking. So he's to set in order the things that are lacking. And then what? All right, ordain elders. See, I'll turn that O into an E. That's pretty good. But he's to ordain elders. So those are the 2 things. Those are the 2 things that Paul leaves Titus at Crete to do. Now, one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is, did he accomplish those 2 things? I'm going to assume that he did. All right. I don't know of anything that tells us that he didn't, but I don't know of anything that tells us that he didn't, or that he did. But as we take a look at that, what do we notice about Titus? Titus is one of those guys that he's going to do work. All right, he's going to put in the work, and we see that all throughout the other verses that we talked about, especially the first two messages, the introductions. But I want you to notice something real quick. What do you notice here? And I'll just pull out a few things real quick to get where we're going. You remember last week when he talked about holding fast? Do we remember what it was that we said holding fast? And we talked about that was different than standing fast, right? Standing fast is the fact that you're not going to be moved. What was holding fast? What did we say that was last week? All right, hold on to something, keep it. Don't let it go, right? And so what's he tell him to hold fast? He tells him to hold fast the what? Faithful word. All right, so I want you to notice something real quick. What's he say? Notice that holding fast. Does he say you held fast to it? Does he say you need to hold fast? No, he says holding fast. What's that tell us? If you're holding something, what does that mean? It's active, it's continuous. You're not going to stop, right? Not just the fact that, hey, I have some faithful word and I want to hang on to it. It's not that. It's holding. It's an active thing that's presently going on, and it's going to continue going on. Do we see that? All right, and as we go through, he says, holding fast the faithful word, as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. So, as we take a look at this, the faithful word that he's talking about, that these guys need to be able to hold fast to, or holding fast to, is that sound doctrine. All right? So that faithful word is the sound doctrine. So what is it that he's telling Titus that you need to go and find people that are going to do what? Hold fast to the faithful word of that sound doctrine. So when I think about what's going on there, and I want you all to think about what's going on today. If we take a look at our society right now today, this is a really good time to be able to do this, because this is the first message that we've got for 2020, right? This is the first message that we have for this new decade. And somebody shared a meme a couple weeks ago, and it was this guy holding two books. One was New Year, New Me, and the other one was New Decade, New Me. Which jokes do I want to tell? Right? How do I want to go about doing this? Do I want to just keep on it's New Year, New Me, we're going to start doing this because it's a new year, right? And everybody always looks at this time of year as to do something new. Now, and we're going to talk about there's a reason why, all right? And it's not just because it was January 1st, 5 days ago? But then you also got to think, new decade. There's a new decade that's just started, right? So when I look around and I see the things that we see outside of our local group in Christianity especially, there are very few people that are holding fast to these things. All right. So what they're doing is what? The list of songs that I have on YouTube that I play Sunday mornings before we get started. I just happened to notice there was a comment on one of the videos that says, why can't we sing these old hymns in our churches instead of these the teenagers' repetitive things that have absolutely no message, no heart, no nothing? And I got to thinking, I was like, that's exactly what it is. And you want to know why your church doesn't do those things anymore? Because your church doesn't hold fast to the faithful word or that sound doctrine. And so then you're going to lose kids. You're going to lose adults. You're going to lose children. And that's one of those things that was going to happen. So what is it that Paul tells Titus that the main thing here that he needs to do is hold fast the faithful word and hold fast that sound doctrine, because that sound doctrine is the thing that's going to endure. All right, we go over to Timothy, and what's he tell us? there's going to come a time when they will no longer endure sound doctrine. Now, that's not people out in church that have never heard sound doctrine. That's people that's heard sound doctrine and they've moved away from it. He says they will no longer endure sound doctrine. So when I think about those things and then couple that with, notice what he says in verse 10. All of a sudden it's gotten chilly in here. You want to check that? It hadn't cooled off at all, and then all of a sudden, if I'm cold, it's got to be cold. But notice in verse 10, because I want you to notice some things here real quick. Verse 10, Paul is talking about gainsayers in verse 9, right? Verse 10 he says, "For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision." All right? He says, "Whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things that they ought not for filthy lucre's sake." Notice this in verse 12. "One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretan are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies." Paul says this witness is true. So I want you to notice something real quick about that. Do we know something about the folks at Crete? We know that they're what? Unruly, vain talkers, deceivers. They subvert whole houses. They teach things that they ought not for filthy lucre's sake. One of their own prophets say that they're all liars. Now you take a look at that, and you look out in our world right now today. There's a lot of Cretans out there. In fact, that was a way, if you called somebody a Cretan, that was the same thing as calling them a liar. Well, one of the interesting things about this is, if you back up to verse 2, notice in Titus chapter 1, verse 2, it says, "In hope of eternal life, which God that what? Cannot lie." So is there a difference between the Cretans and God? Yeah. One lies all the time. The other one, it's impossible. Somebody says, all things are possible with God. Well, you can't lie with Him. What's that right there? What's that verse tell us that God cannot do? Can God do everything? No, He can't lie. You see that? That is something that He cannot do. And so then I was listening to our famous, and Ronnie was asking me about this guy the other day, and I said, I've not listened to him much here in a long time. Our Calvinist buddy in Lexington, the Grace Bible Fellowship guy, Todd Nybert. I was listening to him this morning, and he was talking all about his predestination stuff. Do you know what predestination people, do you know what they are? They're Cretans. They're liars. They lie about what that book says. 99.9% of the time, they're Cretans. Most churches out there today are Cretans. Now I want you to think about this real quick. Does Paul know something about the people at Crete? Does he know something about the people that he's sending Titus to? Does he just say, hey Titus, I want you to go over here because they need a pastor and I want you to go and set things up? Without any clue what's going on. Titus knows something about Crete because Paul told him about it. Does that make sense? So when Titus goes to Crete, he knows exactly who he's dealing with. Okay? Now, that's important because where we are today and what we're getting ready to talk about. Real quick, let's go. I've got notes on this all over the place. You know what's really hard to do at 3:30 in the morning? Write in darkness. So we'll see how this works.
Grace Church, is that Todd's Road?
Yeah, Todd's Road Grace Church. Yeah, I couldn't remember the name of it, but that's what it was. Steer clear of it. One day years ago, I was talking to Delilah, go over to Romans chapter 13 real quick. I was talking to Delilah and I said, this was years and years and years and years ago. I saw this guy on TV, Todd's Road Grace Church. I was like, hey, this might be pretty good. You know, it's a Grace Church. We might have found a place in Lexington. It was about an hour and a half away, but I was like, hey, we might be able to go. Then I listened to him, and I was like, this guy's not Grace. And so then you get a little discouraged with those things. But I want you to notice something real quick. I said Romans 13, right? We're going to get that in a second, but I want you to get Romans chapter 6 first. Did Paul know something about the Cretans? Yes. He knew that they were what? All liars. In fact, he told Titus, he says, this is true. Right? I want you to notice in Romans chapter 6, and we're not going to deal with like the main issues here, but I want you to notice this. Romans chapter 6, verse 3. He says, know ye not that so many of us as were baptized into Jesus Christ, baptized into his death. Drop down to verse 6. Knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed. Verse 9. Knowing that Christ being raised from the dead dieth no more, death hath no more dominion over him. And as you go down through here, just drop down to verse 16. Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are, to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness? If you keep going down through here and you keep seeing these things over and over again, what do we see in those verses? What was the main thing that we noticed in all those verses? No. Notice chapter 7, verse 1. Know ye not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the law, how that the law hath dominion over a man as long as he liveth. Do you think quite possibly maybe God wants you to know something? The answer is yes. Is it enough to know how to rightly divide the word of truth to be able to just go and do whatever you need to do? The answer is no. What does right division do? It allows us to study the Bible the way that God's prescribed it to be studied, right? And so then when we know how to study it, what takes place is we know some things, right? And we're not just out there blindly looking for, because that's what Todd's Road Grace Church and all these other Calvinist people do, is they'll say, well, you just don't know what God's doing. Yes, you do. We do. We know 1 Timothy 2:4. We know that it's God's will that all men be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. We know that. We're not just blindly with our eyes closed trying to reach out and feel some things. Notice Romans chapter 13, verse 11. Romans 13, verse 11. And that, what's that next word? Knowing. Knowing what, Paul? The time. What is it that Paul knew about the Cretans is what? They're all liars. Do you know what else Paul knew? Paul knew that God cannot lie. Do you know what else Paul knew? He understood the time in which he lived. Now, when we take a look at this, he says, knowing the time, how is it that the folks in Rome knew the time? Because Paul taught them. Notice that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. Do you know what he's saying there? He says, you all know something about the time. There's timing involved. What is it that the Scriptures are allowed? Let me do it this way. What is it that right division allows us to do with the Scriptures? Put things in order. All right? So I want you to think of a few things real quick. And this is where we're going to go. There are 3 different ways. Tuesday night, we're talking about there's 3 different ways to study Scripture, right? Well, there's 3 different things with time. The first one is a dot, all right? What's taking place right now is all that matters, all right? That's the idea. I don't think forward. I don't think backwards. All I'm thinking about, all I'm doing is living in the now. Does that make sense? All right. Then you have linear, where you're here, or you might be here, but you're looking forward, or you can look backwards, and that's linear. But you have some sort of concept of what took place behind, what's going to take place and ahead. What do we know how the Bible's laid out is linear, right? But then there's also a third way, and that's circular. And that has to do with what? Cycles. Now, is it bad to be a dot-minded person? Not necessarily. Is it bad to be a linear person? Not necessarily. Is it bad to be a circular person? Not necessarily. What happens is you should have all 3 of those in mind at all times. Right? Now, there's a couple of reasons why we're doing this. Go over to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 real quick. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. First Thessalonians chapter 5, notice in verse 1. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write unto you. Why, Paul? For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. Now I want you to think about this real quick. In the context here, what is it that Paul's dealing with? He's dealing with the fact that some people are coming along saying that the resurrection's already taken place. And so he writes the book of 2 Thessalonians to the church at Thessalonica, reminding them, guys, you all know this information, right? You know some stuff about the timing of things. And he says, there's no need for me to write that to you, because you know it, right? Notice what he says. But of the times and seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know what? Perfectly. What does that mean? If they have perfect understanding, if they know perfectly what's going on, they have complete and total understanding of the time in which they live, and they know the Scriptures. They know where they are in God's timeline, right? How do they know that? They're still on the earth. If the rapture had taken place, what is he telling them? You would have already been gone. Does that make sense? Right? But they know some things, and that's one of those issues that I want us to be able to see. Go back to Matthew chapter 16. Do you want to know why churches do the things that they do, and why they spin their wheels, and why they get why they have so many issues out there? Because of this right here. Matthew chapter 16. Did I not say the chapter? I thought I said Matthew chapter 16. My bad. Matthew chapter 16. Now I want you to notice, and here's the thing. Are we here to build big buildings build big crowds. You know, I was watching a guy last night on one of those ridiculous TVN type stations. I was watching this guy last night, and he had a microphone in one hand. He's leaning against the pulpit like this. He's like, "Come on, man, y'all got to work." It's like, you're an idiot. You know why he is? Because he doesn't know the time. He doesn't understand what's going on. He is just like these Pharisees and the Sadducees in Matthew chapter 16. And he's going around with his slick back hair and his little khaki pants and his Skechers shoes, trying to appeal to the kids and like, I'm cool. No, you're not. You don't know what you're talking about. Because he's a Pharisee and a Sadducee and he doesn't realize it. But I tell you what, do you know what they have? They have 3 Sunday morning services. And they're packed. You know what that tells me? The people in the church don't know either. You know why they don't know? Because their pastor doesn't know. I want you to keep this stuff in mind. Notice in Matthew chapter 16, verse 1. The Pharisees also, with the Sadducees, came and tempting desired him that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said unto them, When is it evening? Ye say, It will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red, and lo ring. O ye hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. Do you know what we're dealing with today in America? The reason the things are taking place is because we've got people years ago that didn't understand this stuff, and we're seeing the culmination and the product of it. What you're seeing in churches today is a product of what took place a generation ago. Now I want you all to think back for just a second, and we'll see this as we go through. What took place approximately 20 years ago that has completely changed the United States of America? 9/11. You are seeing the product in our country today of that event. The reason that this United States is no longer united is because of that event. Now, when you looked back, as you lived in that day, you thought, and I remember this wholeheartedly. Everybody says, man, I wish today was 9/12. Do you know what happened on 9/12? American flags were everywhere. Everybody was an American. And everybody was against anybody else that was an American. Now you look at where we are today. To tell somebody you're an American, it's almost a cuss word. That's how people perceive it. And it's because of that event. Now on 9/12, did everybody think that one day we're going to be in the position we are right now? With everything that's going on in the world, especially our country, do you think that everybody thought on 9/12/2001 that today would be here? That event shaped what this country is today. Now I want you to think about that. Can you now imagine? Because you got to think. Can you believe it's almost been 20 years? It's not even 19 yet, but it's almost been 20 years. I want you to think about that real quick. Can you imagine now, looking forward 20 years from now, and thinking how it's going to be then? Because I want you to think of something real quick. And this is what we call chaotic time. If you live dot thought process, all you care about, it's a hippie. It's all about right now, man. It's whatever I feel right now. Whatever feels good to me, I'm going to do it. That's that dot mentality. Linear mentality says, hey, I know some things are going to happen out there because of the things that's gone on in the past. The problem is they spend too often looking in the past. The circular cycles, we know that things are always going to happen and take place over and over and over again. Now, the difference is all three of those are good when they're used together. But if you live each one of them separately, then you're going to be hurting. Do you know where churches are now? They're right here, and they're reactive to the culture around them. They look at the culture and say, hey, this message isn't popular, so how do we make it popular? Well, let's bring in some music. Because kids love music. Not your music. I'm sorry, but they don't like your music. But that's where they are. And they're reactive because they say, man, this is just taking place. What do we need to do? Well, let's try and fix it. Then you've got other people who are sitting here in the pews, and they're looking back and saying, man, things used to be a whole lot better. Why can't we go back to, and that's what that comment was on that video. Like, why can't we go back to the old hymns? Well, guess what? Your church isn't going to. Your church don't care. They don't care about the word. They don't care about the hymns. They don't care about that stuff. They're trying to get warm seats in cold pews. That's their goal. Because they're here thinking this way. And you've got people in the pews that are sitting there thinking this way. What we need to do is be able to look at all three of those together. Know where we are, know where we're going, and know what took place prior to us. Does that make sense? And we'll see these things. That's why Paul tells them that we know some things, that there's no reason for you to tell us that. Notice, keep on going in verse 4. Now you tell me that this doesn't portray current church. A wicked and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign. Do you know what churches are looking for? They're looking for stuff. Do you know what people that don't know the time are doing? They're looking for things. I was looking through some of the old stuff that I have from other pastors years ago, like J.C. O'Hare and Stam and all that, and I can't remember who did it, but there was a message. The signs of the times there are no signs of the times. We're living in a signless time. In the dispensation of the grace of God, there are no signs that's going to tell us that the dispensation is going to come to a close. Which is why it's so important for us to know and understand the difference between what Paul teaches about the rapture and what Matthew teaches about the second coming, that they're different. They have to be. And that's why it's important for us to know that, so that we're not some wicked and adulterous generation who seek a sign. What is it that this guy on TV or on the radio that I was listening to this morning, what they're doing is they're seeking for some sort of sign. God, give me a sign what you want me to do. When I hear of pastors that say, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, you know what that tells me? You're not in the book. When a pastor says, well, you just don't know what God has in store, that tells me you're not in the book. You are a Pharisee and a Sadducee, and you don't even realize it. But you'll stand up and tell your people that they're Pharisees and Sadducees, and what happens is you don't realize it, but you're talking about yourself. And they don't get it. They're condemning themselves, and they don't even understand that. He says, a wicked and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given unto it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. And he left them and departed. Do you know what he said? What's the sign of Jonas? Well, who's Jonas? That's Jonah. That's Jesus Christ's resurrection. Do you know what the sign is going to be? You're going to understand that one. They didn't understand those things. Go back to let's go back to 1 Chronicles. First Chronicles chapter 12. 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Notice in verse 31. 1 Chronicles chapter 13, 31. And what? 12, my bad. It is 12. It is 12. At the top of mine it says 1 Chronicles 13, 2. Now I was looking at that, so my bad. So 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 31. And of the half tribe of Manasseh, 18,000 were which were expressed by name to come and make David king. And of the children of Issachar, which were men, notice, that had understanding of the times, to know that Israel ought to do, to know what Israel ought to do. The heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment. So, what do you notice there? You've got the children of Issachar, which were men that what? Had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. Do you know what happens when you know something? You know what to do. If you understand the times, then you know what to do. Then you're not sitting there thinking, well, what am I supposed to do? Wring your hands and try to figure things out and go from there. So this is an important thing that I want us to keep in mind as we go through this stuff. Go back to Titus real quick. Go back to Titus real quick. Titus chapter 1, verse 10. Paul's telling Titus what? For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the household especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things they ought not for filthy lucre's sake. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, and slow bellies. Notice what Paul says. This witness is true. Do you know what that means? Paul knows something about those Cretans. He knew something about it, and he knew exactly what they needed. What did they need? They needed sound doctrine. If you take a look at that, keep on going, notice what he says in verse 13. This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply. Why? Or for what purpose, Paul? That they may be sound in the faith. Do you know what that means? They're not sound in the faith. Do you know what he needs to do? Rebuke them sharply so that they may be sound in the faith. Not giving heed to Jewish fables, and he goes on down through there. So there are some things that Paul knew about Crete in order to do the job. So my question is, do we know what's going on here in Frankfurt? Do we understand the time in which we live right now today? Do we understand what it's like to live right now? Do we understand what's going on around us? Now, we get on Facebook and we post things about how, Obama did this, now all of a sudden Trump's doing it, and it's a bad thing, but it wasn't bad back then. Who cares? Get over it. Your problem is not that. Your problem is what's going on in this local church. And your local church, wherever you are. But we get on and we worry about this, and we fuss and fight about stupid things that have absolutely nothing to do with anything other than our pride. But the question is do we know and understand what's going on today in Frankfort, Kentucky, in Georgetown, Kentucky, in Richmond, Kentucky, in Inez, Kentucky, wherever somebody is from, do we know what's actually going on there? One of the weirdest things is when Delilah and I first moved here to Frankfort, and I've said this for years, there is something here in Frankfort that just oppresses you. When we first moved here, it'll take your good mood and turn it into a bad mood like that. There is something in this city. Well, what do we know about cities? What was the very first city that was created or built? Cain did it. Cain built it in rebellion to God. What was the next big city that we know about? Tower of Babel. So that's what I wanted you all to be able to think about as we go through these things. Go real quick to Acts chapter 17. Now, this is something that I've been thinking about for a while, and and we're going to get to the verse that made me think about all this stuff and how all this stuff connects to, especially with what we're dealing with today in the dispensation of the grace of God. Acts chapter 17, we'll start off in verse 22. So I want you to think about something real quick. In order to understand what things are like today, we have to know and understand what the things were like back in Paul's day. Right? And that's one of those things that we should always keep in our mind as we take a look at these things. I said verse 22, right? I wanted you to start up in verse 19. Acts chapter 17, verse 19. He's talking about the Epicureans and the Stoics in verse 18. Verse 19, notice. And they took him and brought him into to Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new doctrine whereof thou speakest of? So these Epicureans and the Stoics and all these folks here, what they do is they go and they get Paul and they bring him in and they tell him what? Can we know what this new doctrine is? And I want you to notice here in verse 20. For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears, we would know therefore what these things mean. For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. That's where we are right now. We're there. Keep on going, verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. By the way, we're there too. Absolutely. You know, I was thinking about the Sadducees and Pharisees over there in Matthew chapter 16, that they can look and they can tell the signs and understand the weather, but they have no idea what's going on in God's timeline. Do you know how many people, they'll say, well, I'm not superstitious, and I don't care about these things, but they'll pick up the horoscope and they'll believe that before they will the Word of God. Verse 23. For as I passed by, here's how he knew they were too superstitious. For as I passed by, and behold your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. They've created a statue, an altar, and had an inscription on there said, To the unknown God. We don't know who you are. Do you know what that reminds me of? Romans chapter 1. Now you think about that. They knew God, but what they did is they denied who God was and made him into a small creeping thing, something that they could crush under their foot. They changed the truth of God into a lie, and they worshiped the creature themselves more than the Creator. That's where they are. And that's why they do that. Notice verse 24. God that hath made the whole world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. Neither is worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things. It's one of those things, and I think about it, everybody talks about all the time, and I'd like to do this one day, is take a look at what's actual worship. Worship isn't doing this to your favorite song. That's not worship. Do you know what that is? That's this verse right here. You've got people in churches doing that stuff, and he says, neither is worship. He's talking about God. Neither is worship with men's hands, as though he needed anything. God owns it all. Well, I just send praise to you. God doesn't need that. God wants you to get in the book and find out what's going on and go do that. Notice in verse 26, this is where we're going. And hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined what? The times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. All right, well, I want you to think about that. They have bounds to their habitation. I want you to think about that real quick. The United States of America looks something like that. I know it's a horrible drawing, but that's okay. Over here we have the Pacific Ocean. Over here we have the Atlantic Ocean. Up here we have our border with Canada, and then down in here, our border there with Mexico. You know what we're surrounded by? 4 boundaries. When we think about that, I ain't even going to get into that. But there's boundaries to those things. But I want you to notice, in verse 26 he says, and the bounds of their habitation. Notice in verse 27, why is it that God puts bounds or boundaries on the habitation of people is why? That they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. Why is it that God puts boundaries and bounds on habitations for people, for countries? So they'll seek him. Now, that takes us back to Genesis. Right? That takes us back to Genesis chapter 11 specifically, but that takes us back to Genesis. You realize there are 4 institutions that God sets up in the book of Genesis. One is volition, right? The next is marriage. The third is family. And the fourth is human government. Those 4 institutions are things that God set forth in the book of Genesis, the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. And what's happened is, if you don't have a border, do you know what happens to your human government? It falls. Well, what's the next? The purpose of human government is to keep those other things in line, to guarantee that you can have a family, to guarantee that you will have a marriage between a man and a woman, and to guarantee that you have your free will. You know what happens if you take that human government away? Those other 3 are no longer as stable. Each one is there to protect the others that came before it. So when we take a look at this, that's the issue that I want us to be able to see as we go through this. All right. Let's go back real quick. Let's just go do this real quick. Go to Genesis chapter 8. And this is really the verse that made me think of all this stuff. Now, one of the things that I do want to mention, and this is why we're different than everybody else. There's a saying that Brother Jordan said a few years ago. That I really took to. Form follows function. Now, one of the things that we have to think about, specifically moving forward, and in light of what we're learning in Titus, we've got to understand that form follows function. Right? That doesn't say that function follows form. That doesn't mean you pick some sort of form and you fulfill your function in that form. All right. So what happens is a lot of times those churches, the Sadducees and Pharisees folks out there, what they do is they say, hey, what do we want? We want kids to come in. What are we going to do? Well, let's make music match what the kids listen to and we'll bring them in. Yeah. So what they're doing is they're saying, okay, hey world, what do you have out there that we can pull into the church to bring the world in? That's what they're doing. They're saying, we want to look for a form, and what we're going to do is we're going to go function in that form. That's the opposite of what God's doing. What God does is function first. You know what we're doing here? We're functioning. Do you know what comes from the function? The form. I want you to think about this real quick. And very few people want to be a part of that. Do you know why? Because that right there is not popular. Do you know why? Because Bible study is not popular. You know why? Because we've said it often, we're not here to make you feel better about your life. We're not here to give you a verse to get you through the week. What we're here to do is to produce the life of Christ in a believer who works with another believer in the local assembly to produce the life of Christ in their community. So the function is what? The Word of God living and dwelling within you. And what happens is a form comes from that function. Now I want you to think back of how we've started where we are now. All right, Mike and Renee call us up. Why did they call us up? They learned something. And they found out we're the only ones around that teach it. And what happened is that function created some sort of form. Now, that form doesn't look anything like everybody else's form. And that's okay. And that scares a lot of people. It scares us. It scares me. I'm not going to lie. You know, somebody outside of our group says, hey man, what you all are doing is awesome. What is it that you're doing? And I'm like, I don't know. It just happened. Why? Because the form wasn't the issue. The function was. The life of Christ functioning in that group of believers. And what happens is we start doing some things. We start meeting on Sunday mornings. Actually Sunday afternoons. And we'd meet 2, 3, 4 hours at a time. Then what we did is we said, hey, let's start recording these on video. Do you know what that was? That was a form that followed the function of what we were doing. And then we said, hey, let's take those videos and put them up on YouTube. That was a form from the function that we had going on. And then all of a sudden, Ronnie finds us. And he's like, somebody's in Kentucky besides me that believes this stuff? And then he says, hey, I want to come and visit you all. Well, fortunately, we had a place where we were meeting, that form, that followed that function. And what happened is he came, and he's been with us ever since. And then he's dealing with some stuff out where he lives because he's got a whole bunch of Baptists around him that don't believe the book all the way. And I know that because we've had conversations. And then David finds us and gets Bruce hooked up to us. And Bruce says, hey, I want to go to a place that preaches from a King James Bible and preaches salvation by grace through faith. And I said, well, you found the right place. And he's been with us ever since. And that form that we created a long time ago from the function of what God's Word was doing in and through us is built up to where we are today. Did we create the form and say, okay, this is what we want it to look like? No. And as I've said, and here's the thing, we don't do what every other church does. How many churches get together on a Sunday morning and have an hour and a half Bible study, basically? None. We're the only ones. That's our form that came from the function of what we were doing. Does that make sense? It's a beautiful thing. Actually, you sit back and you look at it and you're thinking, this is pretty cool. And as I've said, we didn't set up and say, hey, we wanted to do it this way. It's followed from of the Word of God working in and through us. It's not an easy thing to do. And that's why I've said for years, would it be easy on your psyche, I guess, to just go sit in a Baptist church and just listen and then leave and not do what we're doing? It'd be easy to do. It'd be hard to sit and listen to that junk and have to deal with it. But it'd be a whole lot easier than getting up, coming here, setting everything up, making sure the tables are set up and all that stuff. But do you know why we do it? Because of the function. That's why. It's not because we're doing something great. It's because the Word of God working in and through people that want to do something with God's Word. And this is a small city. I think yesterday I saw the population was 50,000 people in Frankfurt. I think that's a little high. But 50,000 people in Frankfurt, that's not many. So you take a large group of people or a small group of people like that and you say, okay, how many of you all want to go to a church where you sit and listen to and talk about and you ask questions about the Bible? Very few of them are going to do that. Why? Because it's easier to go sit in a pew, listen to junk, and then go home and feel better about yourself today. And then you can go about your life the rest of the week. And then you might go on a Wednesday night. If you don't want to, that's okay, because you'll go back on Sunday. They'll make you feel good about your life, and then you'll go on. Because it's easier. Why is it easier for that person to do that? It's because of where they are in this world right now today. So I want you to go back, and this is why I kind of pulled this stuff together, and I got some of this other information. So Genesis chapter 8. This is right after the flood. Verse 20, Noah builds an altar. Verse 21. Notice, and the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. I want you to think about where we are in Scripture in Genesis chapter 8. So you've got the creation of heaven and earth, Adam and Eve, all the animals, all the plants, all living things. You get down to chapter 6, and God says, these people are horrible, I'm going to flood the earth. Right? So he floods the earth, and then after that, you get to Genesis chapter 8, and Noah gets out and builds an ark. And what does God promise? He says, I'm not going to destroy the earth. I'm not going to smite it again in this particular way. So I want you to think about where we are. Is this before or after circumcision is set up? When was circumcision instituted? Circumcision was instituted when? Genesis 17. So we're over here in Genesis 8. Do you know what you have over in Genesis 8? A whole bunch of Gentiles. Does that make sense? Not until you get to Genesis 17 do you have a Jew and a Gentile, circumcision and uncircumcision. So think about where we are in Genesis chapter 8. What's he say? For the imagination of man's heart is evil from when? His youth. Do you know why our country is the way that it is? It's because of that verse right there. There's other verses we could go to. What do we know? What do we know about the heart of man? It's evil. Desperately wicked. That's where we are right now. Notice in verse 22 though. while the earth remaineth. So what's that mean? God's already said He's not going to smite every living thing again as He's done. And then He says, while the earth remaineth. What's that tell us? Is there a time when this earth is going to be done away with? Yeah, we know that there's a new heaven and a new earth because we can read Revelation chapter 22, right? 21, 22. Notice He says, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Now, I read a comment from somebody the other day, and they were talking about the fires in Australia, how climate change has destroyed this earth and has created these fires in California and these fires in Australia and all that stuff. Do you know what that verse tells me? We cannot destroy this earth. The earth's going to remain until when? God destroys it. So we fuss and fight and holler and hoop and do all this stuff and say, well, you can't use plastic straws anymore because we're destroying the earth. Well, you can't have cows because they excrete certain things that's supposed to go up in the ozone layer to destroy the earth. They say people are destroying the earth, so what we need to do is eat babies. People are saying that. To prevent this world from being destroyed, they say we need to eat the babies. That's a thing that happens right now in this world. Do you know why? Because the heart of man is evil from his youth. And I want you to think about what's taking place. Is life sacred anymore? No. Well, we can just murder a baby and that's okay. Because it's a woman's right. God tells man to be fruitful and multiply, which is the exact opposite of murdering babies. And the reason that those things take place is because of that verse right there. Because man's heart is evil from his youth. Now, we're not going to destroy this earth. Who will? God's going to one day. And He's going to burn it up. As Brother Jordan says, to a fare thee well. But the best part is He's going to replace it. But I want you to notice something real quick. And this is where the dot thinking, the linear thinking, circular thinking, all that stuff comes in. Now I want you to think about, where are we? We're back here. Genesis 8, Gentiles. Do we know something about the culture in which we live in order to go and get that culture to understand what God's doing today in the dispensation of the grace of God? We should be able to, right? So what we see is there's some things that are taking place here. Notice in Genesis 8, and I never really thought about doing this until this guy said that, and I was like, Genesis 8:22 answers your question. You're not going to be able to destroy the earth at all. But I want you to notice, what's he say? While the earth remaineth, you have seed time and harvest. Now, there are things here that we want to get, and I would advise you probably draw this picture as we go through, because this is going to be kind of our model as we go through some things. So you have what? Seed time and harvest. So you have seed time and you have harvest. Then what's he say? Cold and heat. It's right there. Cold and heat. Then he says summer and winter. You got summer, winter. Now, what do we normally call seed time? That would be what? Spring. When do you harvest? Right? Do you know what happens? Every year, and I want you to think about where we are right now. Where are we right now? January what, 5th, 6th, something like that? 5th? So January 5th, where are we right now? We're right in here getting ready to go into spring, right? So this is what we would call the winter time. So what do we know about that is when we go around, what's going to happen in, 3 months? We've got what? Spring. What happens in 4 months? Summer. What happens 4 months after that? Fall. What happens 4 months after that? Winter. Or 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, right? So what do we notice about that? Was it winter this time last year? In April, was it spring? Was it spring in April the year before? Was it spring in April the year before? Was it spring in April the year before? So what do we notice about that? That's a circular timing, right? Now, where are we? Probably right there. So we've got to think, where are we? So that's the dot thinking, right? Right? Linear would be, hey, look at what's taking place behind us, but then also let's take a look at what's going on in ahead of us. Was it?
It was like end of December.
So, right there maybe? Okay, so we're a long way away from spring is what you're telling me? Yeah, Bruce is like, I want spring. Now, here's what I want you to think about. When you think about seed time, what do you do at seed time? You plant. You plant stuff. What happens? You start off with a little seed and then it sprouts up, right? Well, what do you do in the summertime? You cultivate it. You take care of it. You understand what's going on. You know that you're going to plant something. Growing up back in Monticello, we would plant corn and green beans. Trying to think what else we did. We had a few other things. Squash, I think, maybe. We grew chickens and all that other stuff. But I want you to think about what's going on. You plant there, you cultivate here. What do you do in the fall? You harvest. What do you harvest? What you planted. Right? If you plant beans, green beans, what are you going to harvest in the fall? It's not going to be squash, right? So what you plant there is what you harvest there. All right, so after you harvest, what do? Well, we got to think, what are we going to plant next year? Now, when we went up to Chicago last year, it's so weird to be able to say last year and talk about 2019. But I want you to think about that. As we're driving down the road, because we took a back way, one side of the road was what? Corn. The other side was soybeans. Right? Well, what they're going to do is if we drive down through there again, what's going to happen is they're going to switch. You're going to have corn on the left and soybean on the right because they know that you can alternate and go like that. So when they harvest, what is it they're going to do in the winter is what? Plan about what they're going to do in the planting season. All right? Now, as we take a look at these things, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes along with this. When you're born, this is just one of those things, and this is why I brought up 20 years ago. What thing took place 20 years ago? 9/11, right? We understand that. So we can see now the result of what took place. We can see the result. We're harvesting what took place over there. Does that make sense? So when we think about this, as far as your lifespan, you've got 0 to 20. That would be your childhood. right? That's where you learn your values. Your what? This is right, this is wrong. Go real quick to Galatians. And we see this in Galatians. Galatians chapter 4, verse 1. No, I say that the heir, is, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all. Notice, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Do you know what tutors and governors do? Tutors will say, this is what you need to do. Governors will say, this is what you don't need to do. So you're under tutor and governors as a child until you get to the point. You know, it's odd that they just passed the legal purchasing age of tobacco is now 21. You know, it's kind of weird. But here's the funny thing. The amount of people smoking, new smokers, is declining because they're all ripping jewels and stuff now, right? Anyway, so you're told, here's what to do, here's what you're not supposed to do. You're learning your values as a child. Does that make sense? You do this, you don't do this. That's what you're told. All right? But notice, he says, even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law. And he goes on down through there. Notice, verse 2, he says, you're under tutors and governors until when? Time appointed to the Father. So what happens is you go from 0 to 20, your childhood, and then you go to your summer time in your life where you're 20 to 40. And what you do is you test your values. All right? You're told, hey, this is good. Yeah. Yeah. So in your 20s to 40s, you test your values that you were taught when you were younger. Do they hold up or not? Do you know why I say this is the most important time to get kids in church, into a Bible-believing church? Is this time right here, so then when we get out in the world, they test the values of the truth of the sound doctrine that they've been taught. And what happens is they test those values and they find out that that word is true all the time and people aren't. And if you don't teach them here, they won't get it there. Which honestly is why we see a lot of the stuff going on today. Next, you've got, here you got your 40s to 60. And that's where you apply your values. By the way, this group here is the ones making decisions. I want you to think real quick. People that are in their 40s to 60s right now, what were they doing when they were younger? You think 40 years ago today would have been what? 1980, right? So you think about what was going on back in the 80s. The reason that things are happening right now in our country is because 40 years ago, those kids were brought up in a system. And you think about that. They're a product of what they grew up in. All right? So let me fix this. So then, the last one here, you've got your 60s to your 80s. What you're hoping to be able to do is transfer your values to the younger generations there. Now, how does that matter with what we're dealing with? All right? So here's what I want you to think about. You remember when we're going through Romans chapter 13, we're talking about how the government's supposed to be able to help you and not put you down, which is basically what our government's done for ages now. Our government today in the United States cannot fulfill Romans 13 because of this over here. We have no borders. We have no security. Now we've got a group of people that call themselves the National Security Agency, but they can't secure, and so what happens is they cannot perform their duty, what Romans 13 says. Now, the way that God set up everything, nationalism, that's the issue. That's one of those things that we've looked at. Now, as we look at these, there's two different things that's going on, and I want you to think about this. Now, this is very interesting because go get Ecclesiastes. And I want you to think about this real quick. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. I want you to think about these real quick. Now, here's what's interesting. Now, part of this, what I'm talking about this morning, comes from the church plant stuff that I got from Grace School of the Bible. All right, it's a thing that they did back in the 80s, and it's still true because it's biblical. Because Genesis 8 tells us this cycle and all this stuff that's going on. And one of the things in here, it says that this, where we were back when they were doing this, says they were in the third season, the fall, which means winter's coming. Now, back in the early 2000s, Brother Jordan says we're in the winter. There's two different things that's going on here, and I want you all to be able to see this, but I want you to notice Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Verse 11. Actually, start off in verse 9. Ecclesiastes 1:9. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. You know what that's a reference to? That right there. Do you know that winter takes place every year, right? We go through it every December, January, February. Keep on going. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. Now I want you to think about that. Somebody says, hey, look at this something. Here's this thing that's new. Then what's going to happen is it's already been of old time. It is before us. Notice in verse 11, there is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. So this is where we got a problem. Do you all know the saying that the reason that history repeats itself is because people never pays attention to what was taking place in history? I want you to think about this real quick. In our country today, months ago, President Trump said that this will never be a socialist country. It will be. We're going that way. Like it or not, it's going to happen. Now, what does that mean for us? We need to know some things, because pretty soon what we're doing right here today isn't going to be able to take place the way it's taking place. The fact that I talk to kids at school about the Bible, one day that's not going to be able to happen. Us being able to walk door to door, knock on doors, one day that's not going to happen because we're going to be meted and greeted with a weapon. They're not going to like it. I want you to think about those things real quick. When we look at this winter, what do we need to remember? What other winters were like? Does that make sense? Understand where we are and understand what was taking place prior to. So what happens is, go over to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Verse 1. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born, right? A time to die. A time to plant. A time to pluck up that which is planted, which is the harvest, right? A time to kill and a time to heal and a time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. And he goes down through here. And what is he talking about over and over again is what? Time. There's a time that God has set this thing in order and it's going to happen no matter what. Do you know what's going to happen every time about this year? We're going to go through winter. Do you know what that means? It's going to get cold. Every time. Now, is it possible that it doesn't get very cold? Yeah, that happened last week. But what do we know on average? It's always going to be coming back to the exact same thing all the time. You know what that tells me? We can't destroy the earth. Now, does that mean that we should go out and take aerosol cans of Aquanet out in the middle of the air and just spray it in the air for absolutely no reason? No. Now, a lot of people don't know what Aquanet is. Does that mean that we should go do things and just throw trash on the ground or go throw it into a lake? No, that doesn't mean. We don't do that. We're responsible because why? We're adults. Where do we learn to throw things in the trash and not in the river is because when we're a kid, mom and dad says, throw that in the trash and don't throw it in the river. Do you know why? I want you to think about this because here's where I want you to think. In 20 years from now, what I want you to think about is 20 years from now, where are we going to be? You have kids right now today that are in schools that are being taught by transvestites how to become a transvestite. That's these kids here. In 40 to 60 years, they're going to be in power. Think about that. I tell my kids all the time at school, I'm like, what scares me is when I'm old, they're going to be the ones in power. And that's scary because they can't make decisions. But as we see this, drop down to verse 15, notice, that which hath been is now, and that which hath already been, and God requireth that which is past. As we take a look at the timing of all these things, there's two things that are involved here. Actually, there's a lot more than two things involved here, but I want you to notice there's two things that are dealing with. Where are we in our church plant, if you want to call it a plant? Where are we? We're in the childhood area right now, right? Depending on how you want to count it, 2 years that we've been meeting here, 5 years that we've been meeting whole. Either way, we're right here. What do we need to do? We need to set our values for this local assembly. Do I care about any other local assembly and how they do things? We don't. We care about this group. They want to do things differently, that's fine. We don't look at them and say, it's ignorant to be able to look and compare yourselves with other people, to compare yourselves among yourselves. But there's other things that I want you to think about too. Where are we in the time of all this stuff is in the winter. Now, we're in this particular season, right? And we know that that's going to happen. But what I want you to think about is, if we want to know how to plan for what we're going to plant when spring comes. Now, when spring comes, I'm not talking about our particular group here. I'm talking about when the world comes. Because what happens is, God has set forth, here's how the nations are going to run. Here's how they're going to run. And we go back here and we find out that that's where Gentiles were, and we want to know how things work, then this is how things work. If we don't understand this, then we're going to be hurting. If we don't get this, then our little group here won't make it to this. Ever thought about that? If we don't get this stuff right, we won't get there, we won't get there, we won't get there. Will CrossWork Bible Church be around 80 years from now? That's what I want you to think about. So when Titus is over here setting things in order and ordaining elders, what's he doing is he's setting up this right here for their local church. Now, time-wise, as far as the dates of things, we're here. So what we need to do is let's go back 80 years and find out what took place 80 years ago. What year would it have been 80 years ago? 1940s? So what we need to do is go look back what took place around the 1920s to the 1940s. You have stock market crash in 29, right? All the bad things happened. But what came out of that was good stuff. Now, every time you've gone through this new birth, this rejuvenation that's coming, we get to be a part of that. That's exciting. Now, time-wise, we're probably right around here, because this time that we're in right now, and I'm not prophesying that things are going to happen, but you got about 2025 before spring comes, around there, just because this is the way that things work out. Happens all the time. So we got about 5 years to figure out what are we going to do when we plant. So we got to plan what we're going to plant. And we've got 5 years to do it. So what we do here as a local assembly, and here's what's amazing. Brother Jordan taught this stuff in 2015. We gone up to the Bible conference in Chicago. He taught this in 2015 over my head. I didn't understand it. But now, 5 years later, thinking about what we've got going on here, going through the book of Titus, I see this stuff makes a whole lot more sense now. Now, the thing with this, I don't expect you all to be able to get this or grasp this right now. It's okay, because we've got time to do it. But what do we need to do? Wake up out of sleep, for it's high time, because our salvation, our catching away is what? Closer than it was. It's nearer than it was. What do we know that's going to take place sometime soon is going to be the catching away of the church, the body of Christ. But what do we know is going to happen before that is we got to be able to plan for what we're going to do next, what we're going to plant. So we got to think, what do we want to harvest? So when we think about these things, it's not, hey, what are we going to do today? What are we going to teach today? I don't know, let's figure it out. Let's just grab a book and read it. It's not, hey, we did this 2 years ago, let's do this again. It's this, what is it that we want to plant that 40 years from now, 60 years from now, we're going to harvest? By the way, 40 years, I'm about to turn 43 in about a week and a half. I'll be 83 by the time we see the result of what we do within the next 5 years. I'll be 88 if I make it that long, Lord willing. I don't mean Lord willing, but if the Lord should tarry. And I want you to think about that. Some of us, I might not be around at that time, but some of you all will. What is that going to look like? What do we want to harvest 40 years from now? Puts everything in perspective. Do we care about numbers right now? No. We care about this sound doctrine, holding fast to the faithful word, and getting that out, and then whatever form it looks like, we go and do that. Does that make sense? It's an amazing time to be in the ministry. And that's why I was hoping today would be a good day. Start off 2020. That's a good thing to think about. So in 2060, think about that. 2060, where are we going to be? What is what we're doing going to be? So let's think about that. And as Brother Jordan and Darrell Mefford always told me, get to work. So then when we get over to Titus, Titus knows this stuff. Titus knew how Crete was. Titus understood the times of the Gentiles. Titus understood those things. And what did he do? He went and did the work. What did he do? He went and found men, got them the information they needed, and he made sure that they were holding fast that faithful word, that sound doctrine, and going about preaching exactly what he was supposed to preach. Which is what? Get people saved to come to the knowledge of the truth. There is no reason anybody should ever say, well, I wonder what God wants me to do. Get people saved, bring them to the knowledge of the truth. That's the plan.
And that's amazing that you bring it out now in our infancy.
This is something that I've not thought of until just recently. And it's odd that that comment sent me this way. Yeah, being in Titus, where we are in Titus, coupled that with what this guy said, and I was like, hey, that's Genesis 8. The earth will take care of itself. God's made sure of that. But seeing these things as we go through Titus, like I said, we were very, very seldom in Titus today, but that's what I want you all to think about. We need to do what? We need to know where we are in time. We need to know who we're dealing with in this community around us. Which is why you can't, and this is what churches do, they'll get a kid and says, hey, I feel I've been called to the ministry. They'll take him from his city, pull him to some other city, teach him the Bible, and send him to a third city. And every 5 years, they'll send him to another city and another city. You know what you can't do if you're going to a different city? You can't learn the community. You can't do the work that God set you to do. So what's going on here is we're going to take the information that we have today in the dispensation of the grace of God where we live right now. There's a saying, bloom where you're planted. Don't pick yourself up and go plant yourself somewhere else and try to figure out what the community is. You know what the community is here. We've lived here long enough. We know what the community is. We understand how Gentiles are. And we've said it before. Don't be shocked when a lost person acts like a lost person. Don't be shocked when people in power lie. Because they're Cretans. They're just like Cretans. Their heart is evil and desperately wicked. And we're not shocked at that. Or at least we shouldn't be. But understanding those things, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense as we go through this stuff. And it's not to scare us. What we're to do is hold fast to the faithful word, that sound doctrine. The doctrine never changes. Our form will change. What we're doing now might change based on the function. It may look different. The problem is churches say, well, we've always done it this way. That's why you're stuck. That's why you've got 7 people in your church and every one of them's over 80, and you're gonna go away and no one's going to understand or remember any of that stuff because all the kids left. Because you didn't give them this because you thought the form was the issue. The function's the issue. Should be. So I want us to make the function the issue, allow God's Word to work in and through us, and then the form will follow whatever that function is. Questions? Comments? Concerns? I could do another one of these on this, but you think so? Really? But you think about that stuff. Where we are right now, we have to get going. That's where we are right now. Understanding that, we move forward. And I appreciate him doing that and giving us that information and going through the church plan stuff. It's amazing to see how different it was then as it is now. But we're doing it. And we continue to do it.
So, in the next 5 years, the real meat of a plan has got to be done.
Yeah. We've got to understand, within 5 years or so, we should know it now. What are we planting? What is it that we want to get over here? How do we go plant it? What do we need to plant? And get on with it. And it's just, it makes so much more sense now. Especially with us going through the book of Titus. It just makes so much more sense now. But of course, at that time, I don't even know. I think we may have been meeting with Mike and Renee at that time. I don't even remember if we were or not. 2015? Okay. So it lasted. Okay. So, I mean, you think at that time we didn't understand what we're doing. Now we do. And it's amazing to be a part of it and understand what's going on. It just makes so much more sense now. And the bad thing is I'm worried that I won't be able to see the harvest. But if we do the function right, then the harvest will come. And it'll take care of itself. Because it's not me. It's the book. You all getting the book in you, me getting the book in me, and everybody here, and everybody that watches, whoever's here, get the book in you. And it'll function the way God's designed it to function. It's exciting time to think about this. I wish I would have understood a little bit more 5 years ago. But I think it means more now because of where we are. We're in this, because like I said, it's overlapping in different ways. Our little group, we're here in the childhood area, and we've got growth. But we're also here in the time of the world, and we got to understand where we're going.
I'm thinking of it like a projector, colors of, like, blue would be where the world is, red would be where we are, so you could see all those different overlapping.
Yeah.
The cyclical.
Mm-hmm. But it's amazing to see it now, and it makes so much more sense now. But I hope it meant something to you all, and let's start planning to plant. Should have been planning already, but let's plan to plant. If you wait to start, then you never get it done. All right. Thank you all for being here. Folks online, thank you all for joining us this morning as well. We greatly appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing where we go. And I think we're on the right track. There are probably some things we could do. Huh? Yeah. I think we're on the right track. There's probably some things we could do a little bit differently, but I think we're on the right track. But we've got time to plan what we're going to do and get busy. Understand where we are. And all those things overlap. Right? Actually, it's really kind of neat to see. Me personally, I'm right here. Because I'm about to be 43. I'm right here.
You know what, you're applying those values.
Yeah.
5 years ago.
Yeah. I was testing the values 5 years ago. Now I'm applying them. No.
Exactly. You're right where you need to be.
I guess I'll be in the summertime.
Yeah, you're testing your values.
I've got one more year of testing.
You're applying right now, so no. You're about to be applying in a few months. Like I said, it's a wonderful time to be a part of what we're doing, what God's doing. Honestly, it's a great time to be a part of what God's doing. And I appreciate all those that's come before us and set that up, that we can have that. And that's why I told Brother Ted when we went and met with him. I told him, I said, I appreciate the stand that you all took back in the 80s. I appreciate the stand that you took on the King James Bible. I appreciate the stand you took on the Grace Life. I appreciate the stand that you all took on all these different topics so that we can know those things now and we just take that information and go with it. And then, like we've always said, and I think Brother Jordan said it, if you're standing the whole time, then you don't have to get up. You're already standing. We're standing. But again, I thank you all for being here. Folks online, thank you all for joining us. Anything else? Comments, questions, concerns? All right. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to study your word. We're grateful and appreciative of the fact that you've preserved it throughout the ages, that we can have it here today before us, that we can take a look at your word and understand what's going on now in the dispensation of the grace of God, so that we can take this information to a lost and dying world to get them saved and then bring them to the knowledge of the truth. Our prayer is that we take a look at this information, apply it in our lives, understand where we are, understand where we're going, and understand what you're doing today. And just be grateful for the fact that we're a part of what you're doing. We thank you for this day. We thank you for your word. And we thank you most of all for Jesus Christ. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.